Leonardo da Vinci, Chapter 4, Lodovico il Moro. As the days went on, Leonardo realized that he was being ignored in Milan just as he had been in Florence. In fact, it was worse. There in his own city, they had at least admired his work and copied it, on the rare occasions where there was a new Leonardo painting to copy. He hadn't made any money out of this kind of compliment, but Leonardo actually didn't care for money at all, except when he needed it to buy new materials or to feed and clothe his assistants. An artist who kept his own studio and had apprentices or pupils had to behave like a father to them. It was his duty to take care of them. We can tell from his notebooks exactly how Leonardo lived, because he put down everything in the notebook accounts. He ate very sparingly and almost never drank the wines that his Milanese neighbors were so fond of. No, money didn't tempt Leonardo. What he wanted with all his heart and never got enough of was recognition and praise. He wanted honor and fame just as much as the Milanese longed for jewels and beautiful clothing. The Milanese couldn't understand his point of view. For a long time, Leonardo lived on the hope that Lodovico would tell him to go ahead on the bronze statue of Francesco Forza, but no word came. Instead, he heard around the town that Lodovico had a very bad reputation for being stingy with artists. The Moor would pay his musicians pretty well, and his tailors and architects, but he seemed to grudge paying painters and sculptors even when he owed them money. In the meantime, Leonardo didn't even have a bad debt to collect on, because Lodovico hadn't ordered anything, and until he did, the courtiers would not show any eagerness for the new painter's work. Leonardo was running out of the money he had saved up in Florence. Even he, with his simple tastes, needed some to go on with. Men in his position in Milan usually got together in a partnership with some other needy artist to cut down expenses. This is what Leonardo finally did. He moved into a studio with a painter named Ambrogio de Predis, and then things went a little better. Ambrogio was industrious and businesslike, though he wasn't much of a painter, and he found work for both of them. He was glad of the chance to work close to the famous Leonardo, and from him learned a lot about painting. As long as the partnership continued, Ambrogio painted much better than usual, especially as Leonardo sometimes gave him a hand. The two men, with Ambrogio's brother, who was a wood carver, were soon given an important order for an altarpiece with a carved wood framework. The contract gave them more than a year to do the work and 200 ducats in payment. Leonardo had been in Milan for almost a year, but the unwary monks who made the bargain didn't realize how hard it was to pin him down to any sort of time limit. Had everybody known that, Leonardo might have starved to death. But in this commission, as in many to follow, his neglected contracts were pulled into shape in the end by his associate. Ambrogio de Predis would take the rough sketch or background that Leonardo had done before he lost patience with it, fill it in with his own inferior work, and get it ready for the purchaser. More and more work came the way of the shared studio. Fortunately, the Milanese were fond of at least one sort of painting. Like Lodovico, they dearly liked family portraits. So Leonardo and Ambrogio stayed together in their strange but profitable partnership. They produced a number of half-and-half portraits and began to prosper. Leonardo was 30 when he came to Milan. He lingered there year after year, waiting to be recognized as he should have been for a genius. Still, Lodovico made him wait. But Leonardo never stopped trying to learn, and his busy pen went on writing as it went on drawing. He corresponded with friends in Florence. In his spare time, he drew sketches of the ugliest people he could find in the streets of Milan. He would work over and over these drawings to show just how skin arranges itself on a toothless mouth, or a hideous nose juts out from a face. He also wrote a long, imaginative description of a catastrophe in the Orient, all made up out of the ancient books he studied to learn something of the history of the world. He drew landscapes to illustrate the tale, so detailed and sure that for a long time people believed he had really made a voyage to the East. But at that time, Leonardo had never left Italy. So he filled his days and scraped up a living, sharing a studio with Ambrogio, whose work he had secret contempt for until he had been 7 whole years in Milan. Then at last some recognition came his way. It seemed strange that this man with his magnificent brain, who had already foreseen many of the mechanical wonders that other men would not appreciate for generations to come, should have to depend for appreciation on his aptitude for designing toys. Yet that is the truth. The Milanese nobles loved a chance to give big parties. They now had the excuse for one of the biggest celebrations in their history. Their normal ruler, the young Duke Gian Galazio, was married to a girl from the ruling house of Naples. Her name was Isabella of Aragon. It fell to Leonardo's lot to decorate the ducal castle for the celebration. It was a grim building of dark red stone. He contrived a method by which a colonnade of living green twigs ran through the courtyard, with a roof over the whole made of gilded leaves. Immediately his reputation improved, for hundreds of wedding guests admired this marvel. Lodovico felt proud of him and began to entrust him with more commissions. Leonardo had many other tricks up his sleeve for the rest of the wedding celebrations, but the parties were interrupted and postponed by the death of Isabella's mother, and such frivolous matters were set aside. By the time the mourning period was over, Leonardo was happy about something else. At last he was embarked on a really important project, the thing he had been longing to do, the giant bronze horse statue of Francesco Forza. For years this memorial had been discussed and entrusted to earlier sculptors, but nothing had come of it. Leonardo wanted to make it the greatest of its sort ever seen. Lodovico hemmed and hawed over the artist's ideas, because Leonardo himself hemmed and hawed so much. The Moor doubted his ability to carry out such grand ambitions. For a while, Lodovico even looked around secretly for somebody more dependable. If he had known about this, Leonardo would have been in despair. Instead, he was in a frenzy of getting ready, going around Milan studying horses, sketching horses, thinking horses, and wondering how on earth to balance a great weight of bronze in the way he wanted. He planned to model his horse rearing up on its hind legs. He wanted to make it enormous and use as much as 100,000 pounds of bronze, no small weight to balance on a horse's slender legs, even when those too were of bronze. Should he rest the forelegs on a tree? That would look clumsy. A fallen soldier? That would be better. In the end, Lodovico did not betray Leonardo after all, for a lucky accident put him out of the idea. Gian Galazio and Isabella came back after a year's mourning. Again Leonardo was set to work getting ready for a great ball in Isabella's honor. The horse would have to wait. Italians have always loved costume balls, and this was to be a masquerade. It must have been a wonderful one to watch. Isabella opened the ball with a Neapolitan dance, wearing a gold brocade gown and a stiff white satin cloak. Then there were more set dances and pageants. Everyone was magnificently dressed, many according to Leonardo's designs. At midnight, one end of the hall was revealed by the raising of the curtain. For a moment there was complete silence. Everyone gazed at the scene, then wild applause swept the room. Leonardo had surpassed himself. He had constructed a great hemisphere of deep blue to represent the heavens. There was a mountain peak on one side, Mount Olympus. It was supposed to be nighttime, and the sky was dark except for the stars. Leonardo had made real stars arranged in the forms of the zodiac as they were thought to be in the sky. He had the 7 planets moving in their orbits and the moon. With these stars, all the constellations kept twinkling, because he had lights running along behind them, moving back and forth by machinery. Then a classical drama was acted out. Figures floated down from Mount Olympus, gods and goddesses. All the while a choir kept singing music that pleased the ears of the guests, while it drowned out the noise of the machinery backstage. Leonardo had constructed this machinery on a new method of gearings. There were dances and songs and a poem written and declaimed especially for Isabella, the guest of honor. This was the accepted way of showing courtesy. The party became known as the Paradise Festival and was remembered in Milan and in other states for years to come. It all may sound rather childish to us because we are used to great spectacles in our theaters, but it was new to the world then. Leonardo couldn't have minded doing it because he loved making anything mechanical and putting his theories to the test. Besides, the triumph of that festival pleased Lodovico il Moro so much that he committed himself at last to being Leonardo's patron. There was no more talk of finding someone else to make the bronze statue of Francesco. Leonardo was able to move out of Ambrosio's studio and set up for himself in Lodovico's great castle. There he had all the space he wanted. Not only was he given living quarters and a studio, but he also had the use of a big room at the top of the castle. Here he carried out all the work he wanted to do on secret experiments. He was allowed to lock up the great room when he wasn't there. He was officially Lodovico's court painter. That year of 1490, Lodovico took Leonardo to Pavia, a city under the control of the Forzas, to give his expert advice on the cathedral they were building there. Lodovico's brother was a cardinal, and it was his cathedral, so the Forzas were especially interested. Nothing much ever came of Leonardo's work on the cathedral, but the trip was good for him. Never before had he been anywhere except his own village of Vinci and Florence and Milan. Pavia's castle possessed a famous library to which many scholars came from distant places. The court painter had the run of it, and he spent long hours studying its books. Leonardo was always conscious of not having a good education. He confessed that he felt like an uneducated boor in the presence of really learned men. So now that he had the chance, he devoured as much learning as he could, and when he went back to his experiment chamber in Milan, he carried on with his tests and theories with even greater enthusiasm. For weeks he was fascinated by architectural questions. No doubt the problem of the Pavia Cathedral set him off, and once Leonardo got started on a train of thought, he would continue for a long time, pursuing it to the end. He planned largely, even wildly. He dreamed up a new kind of city in layers, rather like giant skyscrapers. All the rich aristocrats were to live in the upper regions, away from the noise and work and smells which were much in evidence in the 15th century. The hard jobs of life were to be carried on down below by the inferior classes. Needless to say, this city existed only on paper. After coming back from Pavia, however, Leonardo got started on the study of light. He had found a book about it which made him think again about the theory which everyone accepted until then. People had decided that their eyes sent out rays to whatever they were looking at. These rays then returned to the eye with the image, which was passed on to the soul. Leonardo had thought so too, but suddenly he decided it couldn't be that way. He wrote, "It is impossible that the eye should send out from itself, by means of the visual rays, the faculty of vision." So Leonardo got to work playing games with light. He stumbled on the experiment which we now know well, taking a piece of paper and making a tiny hole in it and watching how light travels in straight lines and comes out of the hole in a cone. He figured out why images will be upside down unless a lens corrects the position of the light rays. From there it was a short step to the study of the eye itself and its lens. For about a year, Leonardo had already been making anatomical studies, dissecting dead bodies. His drawings of these experiments are among his most exact and beautiful. One of the ways in which he immediately used his new knowledge of light and reflection was the construction of a lamp with which he could work at night. Other people toiled away at night in a dim shade. They could do very little after the sun had gone down, for they depended on a dismal little wick burning in a pot of oil. Leonardo took a big glass globe, like a fishbowl, and put a glass cylinder inside. He filled the globe with water, and in the cylinder he put the olive oil lamp with its little wick. Thus the flame was magnified through the water, and he had a splendid light. In his improved position, Leonardo had many requests to take in pupils as apprentices. He did so willingly, but one apprentice was to give him almost more trouble than he was worth. In fact, the boy, Giacomo, was worth almost nothing, strictly speaking, because his father was too poor to pay his apprentice's fee. However, Leonardo found the boy very useful as a model. He looked exactly like the kind of youth the painter liked to portray. So Leonardo took in Giacomo and outfitted him with clothes, keeping a careful account of what it cost him. Of course, he never submitted a bill to anybody, but it was his nature to keep a record. Giacomo was always stealing, and was such a nuisance to the other pupils that he became famous just for that. He stayed on at the studio for years until he was a man, serving as an apprentice and a servant as well. All the while he pilfered and begged for clothes. Leonardo complained all through the years, but gave him what he wanted and never kicked him out. Those were busy days for a court painter. By this time Lodovico was making plans for his marriage to the very young Beatrice d'Este, who lived at Pavia. And of course he called on Leonardo to furnish the festival trimmings with new ideas and gorgeous costumes. Beatrice arrived in January 1491. In honor of her coming, Lodovico ordered all the armorers who had ships along the street down which she was to ride to put out their weapons and suits of armor. The bride rode down an avenue of dummy horses clad in glittering mail, on which sat visored knights in empty armor, brandishing their weapons. The main event of the wedding time was a great tourney, and for this Leonardo furnished a mask. At first Beatrice was bored and unhappy in her marriage, as she was only 15. She turned to idle amusements to fill in the time. She acquired a poet laureate, and at her request he wrote various little dramatic pieces, a play, some masks, and so on. For these too, Leonardo was expected to furnish tricks and surprises. He also found himself doing something new. He became one of the storytellers of the castle, willing away the evenings with little fables which he worked on very hard in advance. He found a lot of these allegories in the ancient books he was so fond of ransacking. Then he furbished them up and used them on the courtiers. They were rather simple stories and always had a moral. To this highly intelligent man, the evenings he spent with the sort of empty-headed people who gathered around the forzas must have felt a bit like running a nursery school. But Leonardo took his duties as entertainer as seriously as he did all his other tasks. He was no fashionable beau. His flattery of the Duchess Beatrice was rather clumsy and awkward, but he did his duty in that way too, because it was expected of him. Games and storytelling didn't leave Leonardo a great deal of leisure. Nevertheless, he found time to go on with his work on the great bronze horse. Of course, he was slow about it, but then Leonardo was always slow. The making of a metal statue calls for a lot of preliminary work. First, you model your figure in some kind of soft material like clay. Leonardo used clay for his. To begin with, he made a little model to submit for Lodovico's approval. Then he made the gigantic statue, still in clay, and it was put up on show in the castle courtyard so that the public could see what a magnificent monument it was going to be when it was finished. But the hardest part of making the statue was still ahead of him, the casting. First, Leonardo would have to cover the whole statue with another sort of plaster and let it harden. Then he must carefully remove the original clay from this shell so that the space inside was the exact reverse of the statue's shape. This opening would then be filled with hundreds of pounds of melted bronze. You can imagine how difficult all this would be with a big statue. When it hardened, he would have to take off the shell. If all went well, he would then have his bronze statue, a perfect copy of the original. If all did not go well, the whole thing would be ruined and would have to be done again from the beginning. Lodovico was very proud of the clay model. As it happened, it was ready just at the time he had arranged to marry off his niece to Maximilian I, the German who later became Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire. Lodovico was giving this niece, Bianca Maria, a very big dowry. This was because he wanted Maximilian to be an ally in the action he was planning to undertake to get control of Gian Galeazzo's inheritance. Ever since he married Beatrice, Lodovico had been more and more anxious to take the young duke's place. Beatrice was extremely jealous of Isabella of Aragon. She could not be happy, she said, until she and her husband had supplanted the young couple. Therefore, Lodovico gave his niece Bianca a marvelous trousseau and a wedding send-off that had every sort of attraction. Among all the wonders of the wedding, the most impressive was that giant horse and rider looming over the little human beings who came to look at it. Everyone who visited Milan for the celebration took back the news of the great horse to his own city. The name of Leonardo da Vinci was at last on everybody's tongue, as its owner had always known it should be.